Hi, I'm Rod Hughes for Lamb Insurance Services, and today I'm joined by Scott Pannone, Senior Risk Consultant for Lamb Insurance Services, and we're going to be talking about a growing fire hazard risk related to e-bikes and lithium-ion batteries. Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Rod. Great to be here.
E-bikes and other electric mobility devices are becoming increasingly popular, in large part due to surging fuel prices. They're also increasingly a safety concern. Why is Lamb Insurance concerned about this? And more importantly, why should your insureds be as well?
Such an important topic to cover, Rod. The feeling really around e-bikes and safety is that these devices are not inherently unsafe, but the way in which they're commonly being used and charged does present major risks. An item to consider is that many e-bike batteries are being manufactured without safety regulations or third-party testing, and that market is being saturated with many of these devices, especially in New York is what we're finding. As I mentioned, where e-bikes and batteries are being stored and charged presents notable hazards. They tend to be stored and charged inside residential apartments or units where there's a presence of combustible materials such as couches, curtains, etc. There's also less of a presence of sprinkler system protection in these areas, which also poses significant life safety concerns in this type of fire event, especially in an apartment or a multi-tenant building. So any nonprofit with residential programs should really begin addressing this growing risk factor if they haven't done so already.
And Scott, how common are these e-bike fires? Is this a risk that nonprofits need to be prioritizing as they look for ways to reduce their risk exposure and improve safety?
Absolutely. The use of e-bikes has really increased, especially since the start of the pandemic and due to the rising fuel prices, as you indicated. E-bikes or other like mobility devices are really starting to reshape urban transit and are a growing climate-friendly transportation option. According to an article that was published by the New York Times from 2019 to 2020, e-bike sales across the country rose 145%. And we're seeing that trend continue to rise. With that said, any nonprofit that has a residential program should be aware of the associated risk factors here and add the topic to risk management discussions and future goal planning. To put the hazard in terms of statistics, through the first 11 months of 2022, the Fire Department of New York has responded to over 140 e-bike related fires. And as a result, there have been 6 fatalities to date. So it is important. We urge nonprofits to prioritize this topic as these risk factors will continue to further evolve.
So, Scott, what causes these fires?
There are a number of causes, a large number of poorly manufactured parts, cheap modifications to existing batteries. As I mentioned, poor storage, poor charging practices are amongst the largest causes here. Essentially, what causes lithium-ion battery fires is an event called thermal runaway, where essentially the battery cells reach a critical temperature and begins releasing oxygen, which then leads to ignition and ends in spontaneous combustion. So without getting too technical, there's a lot of energy in a lithium-ion battery. And when there's volatility in the battery's components or the environment in which they're being used, that ultimately increases the risk for thermal runaway. And I know we'll be discussing mitigation strategies shortly, so I'll touch on a specific scenarios to try and avoid as we go.
So, as we all know, e-bikes aren't the only devices that run on lithium-ion batteries. So what types of other common devices using lithium-ion batteries might be found frequently in facilities of nonprofit or human service organizations, particularly with residential facilities?
Absolutely. There are a number of household products that use lithium-ion batteries, for example, laptops. But for the purpose of this conversation, we really wanted to focus in on mobility devices, which would include e-bikes, scooters, hoverboards, or another like device that would be powered by this type of energy source. The exposure exists anywhere where these devices are being stored and charged, but nonprofits will see an increased exposure, as you mentioned, in residential settings, as residents might be required to to use an e-bike for work. E-bikes make great gifts amongst family members. They're climate friendly, and also, as we mentioned, a cheaper alternative to fuel powered devices.
So are there any best practices that you can offer to either prevent fires entirely or at least mitigate the damage if a fire were to occur?
Absolutely. There are a number of things that nonprofits and residents can do. I wanted to touch on, the top 7 that I felt were notable. One is buying only e-bikes or other mobility devices that are certified by nationally recognized testing labs. They might include symbols on their labels such as UL or ETL and CSA. The labs test these products to make sure they meet industry standards and they're safe to operate under normal circumstances. So it's an added peace of mind. Number 2, only using the original battery or power adapter and power cord that comes with the e-bike or a manufacturer recommended or lab certified replacement. The third would be never using unapproved batteries or chargers, even if they're much less expensive. What we see is battery replacements can be upwards of 50% of the cost, of the original purchase price of the e-bike. Individuals are making alternative purchases to be a lot cheaper. Why is this important? Because unapproved batteries or chargers may not be designed to work with specific e-bikes or e-bike batteries. And the result there is that an unapproved battery could overcharge, could overheat, and thus resulting in a fire. The fourth would be ensuring that the e-bike is plugged directly into an electrical wall outlet when charging. Never charging an e-bike or an e-bike battery with an extension cord or a power strip. Why is that important? Lithium-ion battery charging requires a lot of electrical current, more than most extension cords or power strips can handle. So in that particular scenario, the extension cord or power cord can overheat, and of course, resulting in a fire. The fifth would be storing e-bike chargers and batteries in a safe facility and, trying to the best that we can not allow storage in resident apartments. Because, as we mentioned, the lack of sprinkler systems, there are too many flammable furnishings and household goods such as drapes, papers, and so on. If space allows, which is the major challenge, creating a secure and non-combustible structure and area outside the building for storage would be ideal. We always encourage to, number 6, never leave a charging battery unsupervised. And lastly, never trying to repair or maintain a battery on your own. Cells that are altered and deformed, or those that can leak, can cause a short circuit and build up, resulting in a buildup of heat, which when we talk about thermal runaway, that's one of the risks that could occur. So outside of individual action that could be taken from nonprofits and residents, we're also seeing action on the legislation side to address some of these risk factors. For example, in New York, there have been 2 proposed bills recently around only allowing the sale of batteries if they're tested by that nationally recognized testing lab. And the second is around prohibiting the sale of reconditioned or second use lithium-ion batteries. So, while these steps are helpful, as we can see, they do not address all concerns around this topic. So there's a lot of responsibility that falls onto landlords, property managers, risk managers to mitigate these exposures. And, with that, one last action I would encourage nonprofits to take is really community outreach to provide education to residents. Educating residents about the dangers of lithium-ion batteries would be important. How do we use them, store them, and how do we charge, e-bikes and other mobility devices properly? So it will help increase the understanding amongst residents, on the fire safety hazards here, and help them to also contribute to taking the necessary steps to reduce the risks.
Scott, you've shared a lot of important information here, much of which many of us haven't thought about with regard to the lithium-ion batteries that we have in our own homes, workplaces, and other facilities. What questions should nonprofits be asking their insurance agents to ensure that they've got adequate coverage in case that they do have a battery fire of some kind?
Absolutely, and that's such an important question, and we'd like to encourage nonprofits to proactively touch base with their insurance broker to learn about what potential exclusions might exist that could leave them without proper coverage. We want to look at any exclusions specific to e-bikes or lithium-ion batteries, and also regarding the peril of fire specific to those types of devices. Right now, we're not currently aware of a specific ISO exclusion at this time. We feel that if there were to be an exclusion added to a particular policy, it would be done so by the underwriter in a manuscript form. So it's important to just be aware of this, have the conversation with your insurance broker, conduct a thorough policy review, coverage review, and to help make sure that these exclusions do not exist.
Scott Pannone, Senior Risk Consultant. You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you for your time, and for Lamb Insurance Services, thank you.